The wind howled like 1,000 dying men across the white wasteland of Siberia. Somewhere in that endless silence, a shovel hit frozen earth, slow, rhythmic, tired. The man wielding it wore no gloves. His fingers were cracked and bleeding, yet he did not stop. Around him, other prisoners worked like ghosts, their breath the only proof that they were still alive. The temperature was 40 below zero. No one spoke. No one cried. The cold had stolen even that. It is said that in Siberia, death comes quietly, like a kind stranger. And in the year 1940, the camps were overflowing with those the Soviet regime had chosen to forget. Poets, priests, soldiers, scholars, wives, sons. One of them was Ivan, a former teacher, accused of speaking ill of the state. His crime? A single sentence. His punishment? 20 years in the ice. Every night, he wrote on scraps of frozen wood with bits of coal. His words were not prayers. They were confessions. "I do not hate the cold," he wrote. "I hate the men who learned to use it." But this story did not begin with Stalin. It began long before, with kings and queens who ruled from gilded palaces, deciding the fate of millions with a flick of a pen. It began when Siberia itself became a weapon, a kingdom of punishment born not from justice but vengeance. In the time of the Tsars, Siberia was called the land of exile. It stretched for thousands of miles, a frozen sea of forests and mountains where even hope froze solid. To be sent there was to be erased. For the nobility it was a threat. For the common man it was a curse. And for the Tsar, it was power. Tsar Peter the Great was among the first to use it. He called it a correctional place, a mild term for what was in truth a living grave. His enemies, critics, even friends who had outlived their usefulness, all vanished into that frozen dark. They called him Father of Russia. But in Siberia they whispered another name, the Ice Emperor. Catherine the Great would later refine his methods. Elegant, intelligent, ruthless, she saw dissent not as danger but disease. And like any disease it needed quarantine. Where better than the endless void of Siberia? Whole families were torn from their homes. Nobles who dared to write, "The Empress is unjust," found themselves riding chained wagons east, their estates confiscated, their children forced to watch as they disappeared into snow. Every step eastward was a step into oblivion. The journey itself could take months, thousands of kilometers on foot, through freezing storms and barren plains. Many never arrived. Their bodies still lie buried beneath the endless white, nameless, uncounted, unmourned. But those who survived, they built villages of despair, tiny settlements made of wood and hunger. Guards were brutal, but nature was crueler. Wolves roamed at night. Frostbite turned fingers black within hours. To escape meant death. To stay meant madness. One survivor once said, "The snow was so deep even God could not find us." And yet, there were whispers that some of these prisoners, the educated, the idealists, the soldiers, began to dream of revenge. They spoke of returning west, of rising again. The Tsars heard these whispers too. Their answer was simple: send more. By the 1800s, Siberia was overflowing with human misery. Under Tsar Nicholas I, the system became organized, industrial even. The journey was now called the Long Road of Chains. In St. Petersburg, criminals and political prisoners alike were branded and sent to the east, often marching for months in leg irons, sleeping in open snow, eating rotting bread. When one man died, another took his place. When one escaped, a dozen were executed. It was during this era that Russia's poets began to write of Siberia as if it were a living thing, a monster with icy lungs and a hunger for human souls. One wrote, "In Moscow the Tsar rules. In Siberia the Tsar remembers." Because exile was not just punishment. It was a message. A reminder that in Russia, the throne's shadow reached even to the ends of the earth. But the Tsars, in their arrogance, believed that fear was forever. They forgot one thing, that even in the coldest wasteland ideas don't freeze. Many of those exiled, revolutionaries, thinkers, rebels, carried their hatred for the throne deep within their frostbitten hearts. They waited quietly for their time. And when that time came, when revolution swept the empire, they rose from the ice. They tore down palaces. They executed emperors. They turned Russia into something colder than even Siberia, a nation ruled not by kings but by ghosts of vengeance. And yet, as Stalin's camps would later prove, nothing truly changed. Only the name of the ruler. The throne remained, frozen, unmerciful, eternal. They called them the Decembrists. Young officers, noblemen, dreamers, who, in December of 1825, dared to rise against the Tsar. They wanted a Russia without chains, a land of freedom and equality. But in Russia, dreams like that always end in blood. The rebellion was crushed within hours. Those who survived were branded traitors and sentenced to exile in the most remote corners of Siberia. It was meant to break them, but what came next broke the world's understanding of devotion. Because when these men were sent into the frost, their wives followed. Not one or two, dozens. Women of high birth, duchesses, countesses, the daughters of generals, all turned their backs on palaces, wealth and comfort, and walked willingly into the frozen hell. Their names are carved into Russian legend: Maria Volkonskaya, Ekaterina Trebetskaya, Polina Annenkova. Each one left behind children, estates, entire lives. When the Tsar was told of their choice, he reportedly whispered, "They will be dead within a month." He was wrong. They survived, but survival in Siberia came at a cost. They traded silk for rags, chandeliers for dim oil lamps, carriages for sleds pulled by starving horses. When they arrived, they were met not with prisons, but with endless white forests that groaned under snow, huts built from ice, and men who looked more like shadows than soldiers. They built homes from frost. They gave birth in storms. They buried their children in the frozen ground with bare hands. Yet they did not turn back. For years, letters smuggled from their hands reached St. Petersburg, words filled not with despair but defiance. "Tell the emperor," one wife wrote, "that Siberia has not frozen our hearts." The guards began to fear them. The locals called them holy women. And deep within the empire, whispers grew: if such noble hearts could defy the throne, maybe the throne was not divine after all. This terrified the Tsar more than any rebellion. Because Siberia was supposed to be the end. Instead, it became the birthplace of resistance. But not all stories from the frozen wasteland spoke of love or honor. Some told of madness. One winter, a nobleman exiled near Irkutsk began to lose his mind. He carved a throne from ice and forced other prisoners to bow before him, calling himself the Tsar of Siberia. When the guards laughed, he stabbed one with a shard of frozen bone. The next morning they found him sitting on his icy throne, frozen solid, smiling. There were others too. Men who spoke to trees, women who sang lullabies to snow, children born in exile who had never seen the sun. Siberia twisted even the strongest hearts. And through it all, the throne in St. Petersburg grew heavier with guilt, though no Tsar would ever admit it. For while they ruled from gold, their empire rested on bones buried beneath the snow. By the mid-1800s, hundreds of thousands had been sent east. Criminals, rebels, poets, even entire villages that had offended royal decree. No court, no mercy, no appeal. Siberia was not a punishment. It was erasure. Yet history, as always, has a cruel sense of irony. Because from the ice rose ideas that no emperor could kill. In the darkness of those frozen huts, exiles taught peasants to read. They spread the seeds of revolution, knowledge, anger, and hope, until even the snow could not contain it. When the revolution finally came in 1917, the Tsar's empire collapsed in days. The palaces were stormed, the royal family executed, and the crown, that once commanded fear, melted into dust. But Siberia remained. The camps, the fences, the ghosts, they simply changed masters. Where the Tsars once ruled through exile, Stalin would rule through annihilation. He did not exile rebels to Siberia. He sent entire generations. Under him, the frozen empire reached perfection, not as punishment but as system. Factories of suffering, run by men who had forgotten what mercy meant. Gulags. Inmates called them the Kingdom of Frost. And in a way they were right, it was still a kingdom. Only now the throne was colder than ever. They say empires die when their thrones grow colder than the hearts of the people. But Russia never let the ice melt. When the Romanovs fell, the world thought the frost had cracked. The red banners rose, the Tsar's palaces burned, and the people cheered, believing the centuries of exile and tyranny were finally over. But they didn't know that the same frozen spirit of power had merely changed faces. From the ruins of the Tsar's empire emerged another ruler, one who didn't believe in crowns but in control. His name was Joseph Stalin. And if the Tsars had sent thousands to Siberia, Stalin would send millions. Under his rule, the icy wasteland became something far worse than exile. It became industry. Pain became organized, suffering became measurable, and death became routine. The camps, known as Gulags, stretched across the map like veins of cold iron. Each one swallowed lives by the thousands. Writers, priests, soldiers, even children, no one was safe. Some were sent for crimes they didn't commit, others for simply whispering the wrong name. And the irony? Many of the Gulag camps were built upon the ruins of the same Tsarist prisons. The same wooden barracks where the Decembrists had once dreamed of freedom. The empire had changed, but the snow remembered. The guards laughed as prisoners marched barefoot across frozen ground. Men were forced to build railroads through permafrost that swallowed the dead before morning. The work never stopped. The wind never rested. One survivor wrote, "In Siberia there are only two seasons, winter and hell pretending to be winter." And yet, within this horror, something impossible endured. The same resilience that once burned in the hearts of the Decembrists now flickered in the gulags. Prisoners scratched poetry into walls, shared scraps of bread, whispered prayers to no one but the snow. Even in the coldest darkness, humanity refused to die. Perhaps that is what made Siberia so terrifying, not just the cruelty but the courage it revealed. Because cruelty ends when the victim breaks. But Russia's prisoners never did. In time the gulags fell silent. The guards left. The gates rusted. But if you walk through those ruins today you can still feel it, the echo of boots, the faint rhythm of breath, the weight of silence heavy enough to freeze the soul. And as history repeats itself, one truth lingers like frost. Power, no matter how divine it seems, always builds its throne upon the bones of the forgotten. From the Tsars to Stalin, from the Empire to the Union, every ruler thought the snow would hide their sins. But snow does not bury. Remembers? So when you look at modern Russia, its cities of glass, its armies, its unbroken pride, remember what lies beneath the ice. 1,000 voices whispering through the wind. We were here. We built your empire. We froze so you could stand. Is the true empire of Siberia. Not gold, not glory, just silence, and the endless reign of a throne carved from ice.